you ever stop to question the one milestone society insists you absolutely must achieve to live a fulfilled life?
Right, the big one.
Yeah, the big one. Really stop to think about it. Stripping away all the cultural expectations, the family pressures at every single holiday gathering, and those romanticized movie
Oh,
montages.
the montages are everywhere.
They really are. We're told, almost from the moment we can understand language, that growing up means finding a partner, settling down, and having children. It's presented not just as an option, but as the ultimate destination, the default setting of human existence.
Get the baby doll to play with before you can even walk.
Exactly. You watch the commercials where the exhausted but glowing parents smile over a sleeping infant. But what if that default setting is actually the source of an immense amount of unnecessary suffering?
It's a huge question to ask.
It is. What if the most profound act of love and responsibility you could possibly commit is to refuse to participate in that cycle altogether? Welcome to today's deep dive. I am so glad you are here with us because today we're going entirely off the script that society has handed us.
Way off script.
We are exploring the philosophy of antinatalism, and before you assume this is just some pessimistic, dark corner of the internet, I want to challenge you to stay with us because the materials we're looking at today reframe this concept completely.
You really do.
They present antinatalism not as an act of bitterness, but as a profoundly empathetic, deeply rational, and an incredibly relevant approach to life and moral responsibility in the world we live in right now.
It's a genuinely transformative way to look at human existence, and focusing on that empathy is a perfect place to start.
Sure.
The materials provided for today's deep dive offer a powerful, rigorous argument for antinatalism. They challenge you, the listener, to completely invert how you view the refusal to procreate. It forces us to ask whether choosing not to create new life might actually be the ultimate exercise in moral responsibility.
Right.
We're going to deconstruct that romanticized narrative of birth. We're going to look closely at the ethical dilemma of simply existing. And we'll explore why prioritizing the people who are already here might be the most compassionate decision one can make for a better world.
And to do this justice, we really have to set some ground rules for our conversation today. The sources you've shared with us are incredibly rich. They consist of deeply personal, deeply philosophical writings, but we're going to maintain strict source anonymity throughout this deep dive.
Absolutely essential.
Yeah, we're doing this intentionally because we want to focus entirely on the ideas themselves. We aren't here to analyze the specific author, their background, or the publication.
Right, no ad hominem stuff.
Exactly. We are here to analyze the raw concepts, the lived experiences, and the philosophical arguments they present. We want these ideas to stand on their own merit, so you can weigh them against your own observations of the world.
Which is really the only way to approach a philosophy that challenges our most deeply held biological and cultural assumptions.
For sure.
When you remove the author, you're left with just the argument. And the argument we're examining today asks us to look at the world without the rose-colored glasses of biological imperative. It asks us to step outside of millions of years of evolutionary programming that just screams reproduce and instead use our higher reasoning to ask, should we?
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the absolute core of what antinatalism actually is, as defined by our source material. Because I think there is a huge misconception out there.
Oh, massive.
If you just hear the word antinatalism, your mind might immediately jump to the idea that these are people who just hate children or hate life or walk around miserable all day.
Which is so far from the truth presented here.
Right. The philosophy outlined in our notes defines it in a completely different way. It suggests that antinatalism, at its heart, challenges the conventional default assumption that creating life is inherently good. Instead, it frames bringing a new human into the world as a massive moral dilemma.
That phrase, inherently good, is doing so much heavy lifting in our society.
Oh, it really is.
We treat birth as a universal positive, a miracle, a blessing. When someone announces a pregnancy, the default mandatory response is congratulations.
You literally buy them a card that says exactly that.
Right. There is no room for hesitation or questioning the ethics of that decision in polite society. But the author asks us to pause and consider the reality of the human condition. They emphasize that life is inextricably linked with suffering, pain, and inevitable hardship.
Always.
To live is to suffer, at least to some degree, and by bringing a new human into the world, we're forcing them to experience these burdens. But the crux of the philosophical argument here, the concept that really forces you to stop and think, is the asymmetry of consent. Simply put, we never asked to be born.
The asymmetry of consent. I really want to linger on this because it's such a sticky concept. When I was first reading through the notes, my immediate instinct was to reject it. I thought, well, obviously you can't ask a non-existent thing for permission to exist.
Right, it feels like a logical trap.
Yeah, it's a paradox. It almost feels like a semantic trick. But how does the philosophy actually navigate that paradox? How do they justify using consent for a being that isn't even there yet?
It's a very natural reaction to push back on that because it does sound like a paradox at first glance. The philosophy navigates it by flipping the burden of proof, essentially.
Okay.
Think about how we view consent in every other ethical framework. If someone is unconscious or otherwise unable to give consent, our default ethical stance is to not act upon them.
Especially if there's a risk of harm.
Exactly, especially if that action carries a significant risk of harm. The author's argument is that non-existence is a state of zero harm. A non-existent being is not suffering, nor are they missing out on pleasure because there is no they to experience the deprivation.
They aren't floating in space feeling left out.
Precisely. The moment you create them, you are unilaterally subjecting them to a reality that guarantees at least some level of physical and psychological pain and ultimately death.
That makes a lot of sense when you frame it around the potential for harm. We value consent so highly in modern society. You need consent to borrow a car, to sign a contract, to enter into any kind of medical procedure.
It's the absolute bedrock of modern ethics.
It is. But when it comes to the biggest, most consequential thing that can ever happen to a person's existence itself and a guaranteed eventual death, there is absolutely zero consent involved.
None. It is the ultimate unilateral decision. Creating life means making a monumental choice on behalf of someone else. You are imposing a state of being onto a non-existent entity.
Yeah.
And as the argument points out, this person you are creating may not wish to bear the burdens of existence once they arrive. You are placing a massive gamble on their behalf. You're betting that the joy they experience will outweigh the inevitable pain, the emotional turmoil, the illnesses, the heartbreak, and the absolute certainty of their own mortality.
You're making that bet with someone else's chips.
Exactly. With someone else's chips.
While I was reading this, I kept trying to visualize it to make it more concrete. It's like, imagine you decide to sign a stranger up for a lifelong, incredibly grueling obstacle course.
Okay, I like this.
And not just any obstacle course, but one where you know for an absolute fact they are going to get injured at some point, they're going to feel exhausted, they're going to face moments of sheer terror, and ultimately they are not going to survive it. And you sign them up for this without their permission, simply because you thought it would be a fun experience for yourself to watch them run it, or because you wanted the pride of saying, I brought someone to this obstacle course. When you look at it through that lens, it shifts from a miracle to something that sounds almost cruel. Am I understanding the author's stance correctly with that analogy?
You're capturing the exact ethical dilemma the author is highlighting. What's fascinating here is how the source material systematically anticipates and dismantles the defenses we usually mount against that exact analogy.
Because people will definitely defend it.
Oh, inevitably. Because the most common defense, the one that immediately springs to mind for most people, is, yes, there is pain, but life is a beautiful gift. The obstacle course has beautiful sunsets and moments of profound love.
Right.
The author doesn't deny that joy exists, but they challenge the assumption that the presence of joy justifies the imposition of suffering.
Right, because if I don't sign that person up for the obstacle course, they aren't sitting in some waiting room feeling sad that they missed the beautiful sunset. Exactly. They just don't exist. They are spared the broken bones, and they have no concept of the missed sunset.
Precisely. The absence of pain is good. The absence of pleasure for a being that does not exist is not bad. It is simply neutral.
That's a huge distinction.
It is a foundational pillar of antinatalist thought. The author asserts that life is inseparable from pain. And they aren't just talking about abstract philosophical angst here. They ground this in very specific, inescapable realities of the modern human condition to show just how risky that gamble of existence truly is.
And the source material gets very granular about those realities. It mentions personal pain, obviously. We all know we will face physical illness, a loss of loved ones, heartbreak, and grief.
Unavoidable parts of living.
But it also zooms out to the macro level, which feels incredibly relevant right now. It points to environmental decay. We're living in a world where the climate is becoming increasingly unstable. We're looking at resource depletion, extreme weather events, and a degrading natural world.
Hmm.
And then the author points to mental health struggles, which are at epidemic proportions globally. Plus, economic uncertainty, the sheer grinding stress of trying to survive, to pay rent, to buy food in an economic system that feels increasingly rigid and unforgiving for the average person.
And this is where the philosophy demands that we be brutally honest with ourselves, stripping away our optimism bias. The text asks a profound question. In the face of all this, environmental collapse, economic instability, widespread social unrest, why do we keep insisting on bringing more people into the fray?
It's a tough question.
It is. The author notes that collective responsibility doesn't seem to be humanity's top priority. Short-term gratification, societal pressure, and biological self-interest often take precedence over long-term ethical thinking and collective well-being.
So to go back to analogies, if we know the house is currently on fire and we aren't sure we can put it out, why are we actively carrying new people inside?
That is exactly it.
That is such a stark way to put it, and it makes me think about how we evaluate our own motivations. The author is challenging us to look past our biological programming, which is a really uncomfortable thing to ask of anyone.
Highly uncomfortable.
It forces you to look in the mirror and ask, am I having a child for them, or am I having a child for me? And if it's for me to fulfill my desire for a legacy, or my desire to nurture, or simply to meet the expectations of my parents who want grandchildren, is it ethical to use another human being's entire existence as a means to fulfill my own psychological needs?
That is the exact uncomfortable truth we are meant to confront. It's asking us to critically assess our motivations with absolute transparency. Are they rooted in a clear-eyed assessment of what is best for the hypothetical child? Or are they rooted in our own desires, our fears of loneliness and old age, or our cultural conditioning?
Usually the latter.
Right. When you realize you cannot guarantee the happiness, health, or well-being of a child, but you can guarantee they will experience pain and eventually die, the antinatalist conclusion becomes a remarkably rational harm reduction stance.
It really shifts the narrative from this idea of entitlement to have children like. It's a fundamental right you just cash in on when you hit 32 or most, a deep, profound responsibility to prevent harm.
Yes.
If you accept that suffering is inevitable and that consent is impossible, then minimizing harm becomes the highest virtue. You're actively preventing the perpetuation of unnecessary suffering by simply choosing not to start the cycle again.
It's a form of preventative care on a philosophical level. It argues that it is ethically unjustifiable to impose this suffering on another being without their consent. And what makes this source material so compelling is that it doesn't just stay in the realm of abstract philosophy.
No, it gets very practical.
It doesn't just talk about existence and harm in these lofty academic terms. It brings it right down to earth, straight into the living rooms, the nurseries, and the daily lives of everyday people. It takes dead aim at how we talk about and experience parenting.
Which is such a necessary pivot, because if we accept this heavy philosophical premise that existence guarantees suffering, how does the author reconcile that with the way society practically worships the idea of parenthood? Society works very hard to maintain the illusion of the ideal family. We have an entire industry, a baby industrial complex, really built around selling this ideal.
We absolutely do. And the author specifically calls out the glowing, idealized terms we use to describe having children. Think about the imagery we are constantly bombarded with.
The diapers with the smiling babies on the box.
Exactly. The author mentions the focus on a child's first steps, the sweet laughter, the boundless joy, the deep magical connection that supposedly instantly solves all your existential dread. Parenting is framed culturally as this noble, selfless act that brings the ultimate, unparalleled fulfillment. It's presented as the highlight reel of human existence.
But I appreciate how the author systematically contrasts that highlight reel with the actual day-to-day grind. It's like those baby food commercials. They show the glowing mother spoon-feeding a perfectly clean, giggling baby in a sunlit kitchen.
A completely spotless kitchen.
Never a dirty dish in sight. They never show the 3 a.m. blowout diapers where you haven't slept in 3 days, you're covered in bodily fluids, your partner is snapping at you, and you are just weeping from sheer exhaustion.
Reality is much darker.
It is. The source material explicitly details these relentless challenges. The sleepless nights that don't just happen once or twice, but stretch into weeks, months, and sometimes years. The overwhelming, constant buzzing stress of keeping a tiny, fragile human alive and functioning.
And we cannot gloss over the financial burdens, which the author brings up as a major stressor. Raising a child in the modern world is staggeringly expensive.
Just the hospital bill to have them is insane.
And that's just day one. The pressure to provide a stable, nurturing environment, housing, healthcare, education, food, childcare, can quickly morph into a suffocating weight. The text notes how parents often feel completely trapped by the economic reality of their decision.
And that exhaustion, both physical and financial, leads to something really profound that the author highlights: a massive loss of identity. I thought this was one of the most empathetic points in the material. To be a parent, particularly in the modern, isolated nuclear family structure where the proverbial village has completely disappeared, often requires sacrificing your own dreams, your passions, and your mental health.
The village is gone. It's just you and the child.
Exactly. The individual becomes entirely subjugated to the needs of the child. The identity of person is entirely swallowed up by the identity of parent.
Yes, the pursuit of being the ideal parent creates an insurmountable burden. It leads to burnout, severe anxiety, and depression. The individual's life becomes a logistical exercise in serving another being's needs. And while society praises this as selflessness, the author asks us to look at the psychological toll it takes on the parent.
Which brings us to a massive cultural taboo that the source material dares to tackle head-on. Here's where it gets really interesting and incredibly heavy: parental regret. It's something people almost never talk about publicly. The judgment is so swift and so severe if a parent admits, "I love my child, but I regret becoming a parent."
It's the ultimate unspeakable thought in our culture.
But the author completely validates this feeling. They talk about unmet expectations. We all want to believe our child will be perfect, healthy, happy, well-adjusted, and successful. That's the dream we are sold. But the reality, as the text points out, is that not every child fulfills their parents' dreams.
It's a statistical certainty that many children will face severe challenges. The author specifically mentions behavioral issues, severe learning disabilities, chronic physical illnesses, and profound mental health struggles.
Yeah.
When a parent is confronted with these realities, the romanticized narrative collapses entirely. The text describes the deep despair and guilt parents feel when their children do not thrive despite their best efforts. They question their choices. They question their abilities. They mourn the life they thought they were going to have, and they mourn the life they thought they were giving their child.
I can't even imagine the psychological weight of that. And it leads to a truly heartbreaking dynamic. The source material mentions that this emotional roller coaster can create a deep rift in the parent-child relationship, resulting in, and this is a concept straight from the text, a lifetime of regret for both parties.
It's devastating.
Think about how tragic that is. The parent regrets the choice that consumed their life, their resources, and their identity. And the child, who didn't ask to be here, senses this underlying tension or struggles immensely with their own imposed existence. Resentment builds, not just toward the endless responsibilities, but sometimes, tragically, toward the children themselves.
And we must emphasize, as the author does, that this is not presented to condemn parents. On the contrary, it validates these complex, dark feelings as a completely rational outcome of a societal system that sells a false narrative.
A complete fantasy.
When you are aggressively sold a fantasy of boundless joy, and the reality turns out to be relentless stress, financial ruin, and emotional exhaustion, feeling regret is a natural psychological response. It's the ultimate bait and switch.
It really is a bait and switch.
The antinatalist perspective simply says we need to acknowledge this unvarnished reality before we make the irreversible decision to procreate. It's about tearing down the propaganda so people can make a truly informed choice.
Exactly. It's about informed consent for the prospective parents. If society were completely honest about the crushing weight of parenting, how many people would still choose it?
Far fewer, I suspect.
If the commercials showed the anxiety, the lost wages, the strain on a marriage, the sheer terror of navigating a child's severe depression, would having kids still be the default? It turns out, as people get more access to information and feel more empowered to question that default script, they're actually making different choices. We are witnessing a massive cultural shift happening right now.
We truly are, and the data backs this up in a way that is impossible to ignore. The source material brings in hard statistics from a Pew Research Center survey, and these numbers provide a stark empirical foundation for the philosophical arguments we've been discussing. They prove that if you, the listener, are questioning whether to have children, or if you've already decided not to, you are absolutely not alone.
Not at all alone.
You are part of a rapidly growing demographic.
The numbers are honestly staggering. The survey reveals that 44% of non-parents aged 18 to 49 in the U.S. believe they're unlikely to have children. 44%.
Nearly half.
That is nearly half of the reproductive age population opting out of the societal default. And what's crucial to understand here is the trajectory. That's a significant jump from 37% just back in 2018. Looking at this from our current vantage point in 2026, we can see how this cultural shift has only solidified and accelerated over the past few years. It is no longer a fringe movement. It is a mainstream lifestyle choice.
To put that in perspective, a 7% jump in just a few years represents millions of people fundamentally altering the trajectory of their lives and, by extension, the trajectory of society.
That's a huge economic shift, too.
It has massive implications for our economy, our infrastructure, our housing markets, and our cultural focus. But the survey doesn't just stop at the how many. It breaks down the why behind this shift, which aligns perfectly with the author's arguments.
Right. The why is fascinating. The primary reason, cited by over half, 56% of non-parents under 50, is simply that they just do not want children. Full stop.
They just don't want them.
They have looked at the reality of parenting, they have looked at their own desires and capacities, and they have made a clear, conscious choice that it isn't for them. But there is also a significant portion, around 9%, who explicitly cite the uncertain state of the world as their primary reason.
Those 9% are essentially echoing the exact ethical calculations of the antinatalist philosophy. They are looking at climate change, overpopulation, resource depletion, and political instability. They feel deep apprehension about bringing new vulnerable lives into a world fraught with these massive, potentially unsolvable challenges.
And who can blame them?
And the author of our source material notes a major historical catalyst that brought all of these anxieties to the surface: the COVID-19 pandemic.
The pandemic effect is so real. I remember those early days. The text argues that it served as a global accelerator for this pre-existing decline in birth rates. It forced a global pause.
Everyone just had to stop and look around.
Suddenly, people were stuck in their homes, facing intense economic uncertainty, public health crises, and the glaring fragility of our social safety nets. It forced a massive reality check on family planning.
When the illusion of stability was stripped away, many realized that adding a vulnerable new life to the equation was simply not a risk they were willing to take. It broke the hypnotic spell of the life script.
It shattered it.
People saw how quickly the systems we rely on could collapse, and it made the decision to procreate feel infinitely weightier. But out of all the statistics presented in the material, there is one that is arguably the most shocking, and it speaks directly to our earlier conversation about parental regret.
Oh, I know exactly which one you mean. It absolutely free-stopped me in my tracks. It is the revelation from existing parents. The Pew survey indicates that 63% of current parents do not expect to have more children, primarily because they simply do not want any more kids.
63%.
That is a huge majority of people who have actually experienced parenthood, who have gone through the sleepless nights and the financial strain, saying, okay, I've done it, I know what it entails, and I do not want to do it again.
It is the strongest possible validation of the antinatalist argument regarding the realities of parenting. When nearly two-thirds of the people who have crossed to the other side of the parental divide tell you that the immense sacrifices are enough, we need to listen.
We really do.
It cuts through the romanticized narrative entirely. It proves that the emotional toll, the sleep deprivation, and the financial constraints are far more impactful than the societal celebration of parenthood admits. Experience is the great mythbuster here.
It really is. And what I appreciate about this section of the text is that it doesn't just dismantle the old paradigm and leave you with a void. If you choose not to have children, society often views you with suspicion. They ask, well, what are you going to do with your life? Who will take care of you when you're old? How will you possibly find purpose?
The classic guilt trips.
The author champions a complete redefinition of fulfillment. They argue that we desperately need to stop positioning having children as the ultimate, exclusive pinnacle of human fulfillment.
Because that assumption is inherently exclusionary and, frankly, factually incorrect. The text points out that fulfillment does not require a traditional family structure. In fact, relying solely on a child for your life's purpose is an unfair burden to place on that child.
It's a terrible burden for a kid.
The author suggests a wide variety of alternative avenues. People can find profound meaning through mentorship programs, building strong, intentional friendships and chosen families, pursuing demanding and impactful careers, dedicating themselves to personal growth, or engaging in creative and artistic pursuits.
Yes. You can pour all that love, all that energy, and all those financial resources into the world in a million different positive ways. The text argues that embracing this broader narrative around purpose benefits society as a whole. When we recognize that not everyone is suited for parenthood, and we remove the stigma of opting out, we can encourage greater investment in these alternative avenues for community building.
And practically speaking, challenging these societal norms empowers you to make choices aligned with your true values, completely free from judgment or expectation. It relieves the immense pressure to conform.
Which is so freeing.
When we dismantle the idea that childlessness is a failure, a sign of immaturity or a selfish act, and instead frame it as a rational, pragmatic, and highly ethical choice, it becomes incredibly liberating. It fosters a more compassionate society that respects personal autonomy and recognizes that there are many ways to contribute to the human experience.
It's about being brutally honest with ourselves and our capabilities. But the source material doesn't just rely on survey data and abstract ethical frameworks. It grounds these arguments in something deeply personal and intensely real.
Right.
And this is where the text gets incredibly poignant. We need to discuss the personal dimension of this philosophy, specifically how it intersects with poverty, empathy, and our vision for the future.
This is perhaps the most emotionally resonant part of the text. The author doesn't just philosophize from an ivory tower or a place of comfortable detachment. They introduce their own lived experience as the anchor for their antinatalist beliefs.
They've lived it.
The author describes being born in a country with little hope for the future, surrounded by systemic economic instability, profound scarcity, and a total lack of opportunities. They have witnessed firsthand on a visceral level the harsh realities that many families endure when they are trapped in poverty.
It's a perspective forged in actual struggle. The author isn't looking at the world through the lens of privilege, where a child might be viewed as just another lifestyle accessory to complete a perfect picture. They are looking at the raw survival aspect of existence. And the text points out a very troubling paradox that the author has observed throughout their life, a cycle that is incredibly difficult to break. The paradox of procreation and poverty.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a dynamic that sociologists and economists have debated for decades. But the author frames it purely through the lens of empathy and ethics. The author notes that those living in severe poverty often have the highest rates of procreation. It's a harsh reality that reveals desperate circumstances, and it requires us to look at the systemic mechanics of why this happens.
We really need to analyze the why here because it seems counterintuitive at first glance. Why, when resources are at their absolute scarcest, when you can barely feed yourself and the future feels incredibly uncertain, do families continue to have multiple children?
It's a complex web of reasons.
The text suggests several deeply entrenched reasons. In some cases, it can become a misguided search for fulfillment, or a desperate attempt to create a legacy when all other avenues of achievement like career, education, or wealth building are completely blocked by systemic poverty.
There's also the reality of lack of access. Lack of access to comprehensive sex education, lack of access to affordable contraception, and lack of access to reproductive health care. Furthermore, in many impoverished communities, there are intense cultural or religious pressures to multiply, often tied to patriarchal structures that equate a woman's worth solely with her fertility.
Right.
And in some developing economies, children are tragically viewed as necessary labor, or as the only possible retirement plan for parents who have no social safety net.
It's a tragic, compounding cycle. Families are struggling to provide for the children they already have, yet they feel compelled by culture, religion, or lack of access to bring new life into a world fraught with massive challenges. And this leads the author to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth, which really forms the empathetic core of their antinatalist stance.
It's a heavy truth.
The author talks about the sheer, heartbreaking unfairness of it all. They express deep pain at the thought of children being born into environments where their potential is stifled from day one, where they are denied basic opportunities, nutrition, safety, education, before they even have a chance to explore who they are.
The text makes a passionate, empathetic argument for limitation. It asks us to deeply consider the ethical implications of allowing children to be born into dire circumstances. Is it right to allow this cycle of inherited struggle to continue unquestioned? Now, we have to be extremely clear here, as the text is, because this territory can be easily misunderstood. The author heavily emphasizes that this is not about authoritarian control.
That is a crucial distinction to make. The author explicitly states they would never advocate for state-mandated restrictions on childbearing out of a desire for control. This isn't about eugenics or government intervention or any kind of forced limitation, which are horrific violations of bodily autonomy.
Exactly. It is a plea born purely of empathy, not authority. It is an invitation to have honest, difficult, voluntary conversations about responsible parenthood at a societal level. It was about asking individuals to deeply reconsider the decision to bring life into environments where suffering, scarcity, and struggle are almost guaranteed.
It's about empowering people.
It's about empowering people with the education and the cultural permission to say no to the biological imperative when the environmental or economic conditions are hostile to a new life.
So what does this all mean? When we take all of these pieces, the philosophy of consent, the unvarnished, grueling reality of parenting, the cultural shift towards childlessness backed by data, and this profound empathy for the unborn, particularly in marginalized communities, where does it leave us? The text synthesizes all of this into one ultimate goal. The antinatalist philosophy, as presented in these deeply compelling sources, is a call for a massive shift in our collective focus.
It's a paradigm shift from the obsession with creating new humans to prioritizing and fiercely protecting the humans who are already here. The text asks us a beautiful, challenging question. Imagine what would happen if we shifted all that immense energy, wealth, and cultural focus away from the relentless drive to reproduce, and instead directed it toward ensuring that the existing families, the existing children, and the existing communities have the resources they need to truly thrive. It's a vastly more humane approach to existence.
It really makes you pause and evaluate our priorities. Why are we pouring immense resources, emotional energy, and societal infrastructure into creating more people when millions of people currently walking the earth are suffering from a lack of those exact resources? We have children in the foster care system, we have communities without clean water, we have a mental health crisis.
We have so much work to do for the living.
The author's journey led them to see antinatalism not as a rejection of love, but as an expansion of it. It's a call for greater awareness. Sometimes, the most compassionate, loving choice you can make is to look at the state of things and say, the world is difficult enough. I will not force someone else to navigate it. Instead, I will help those who are already stuck in the maze.
To summarize the profound journey we've been on in this deep dive, we started with the abstract, yet incredibly robust philosophy of consent. The undeniable fact that no one asks to be born into a world where suffering is an absolute guarantee. We then moved into the grueling, often unspoken realities of parenting, stripping away the cultural romanticism and the commercialized highlight reels to reveal the true potential for burnout, loss of individual identity, and profound taboo regret.
We validated that perspective by looking at the hard data from Pew Research, seeing that millions of people, including a stunning 63% majority of current parents, are recognizing these immense sacrifices and actively shifting away from the default expectation of endless procreation.
And we ended on a deeply personal, intensely empathetic plea from the author's own lived experience. A call to look at the heartbreaking intersection of procreation and poverty, and to recognize that true ethical responsibility lies in caring for the existing world, healing our current wounds, rather than mindlessly populating it further in the hopes that the next generation will fix our mistakes.
I want to address you, the listener, directly right now. Whether you are child-free by choice, whether you are currently on the fence agonizing over this massive decision, or whether you are just an incredibly curious person who loves exploring challenging, paradigm-shifting ideas, I hope this deep dive has offered you a liberating perspective. The philosophy we explore today removes the immense societal guilt often associated with not wanting to procreate. It replaces that guilt with a profound sense of global and ethical responsibility. It reframes a no to biological parenting as a massive, empathetic yes to minimizing harm and maximizing care for the world that already exists.
And I'm going to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on the incredible sources we've explored today. If society collectively agreed tomorrow that procreation was no longer our default purpose, imagine the sheer volume of time, wealth, and emotional energy that would suddenly be freed up. What could we achieve as a species if we poured all of that immense parenting energy into healing the generations that are already walking the earth? What if our true legacy was not defined by the DNA we pass on, but by the suffering we successfully prevented?
That is such a powerful question to carry forward, and I think it perfectly encapsulates the vital perspective the source material offers. Thank you so much for listening and exploring these difficult, complex, but absolutely necessary ideas with us today. It takes courage to question the default settings of our culture, and we are thrilled you took this journey with us. If you value this kind of deep, unflinching analysis that goes beyond the surface level, please support us and subscribe to the channel. Your support is exactly what allows us to keep bringing you these custom-tailored deep dives. Until next time, keep questioning and take care of yourselves and each other.